Friends, let us begin with a simple yet disturbing fact. Israel once again finds itself under fire. This time, the attack did not come from Gaza nor Lebanon, but from Yemen, where the Houthis launched a drone strike on the city of Eilat, injuring civilians and shaking a region already drowning in instability. The question we must ask today is not only what happened, but why it happened and what it tells us about the future of the Middle East and the world economy. Because make no mistake, wars are not simply about borders or religion. They are about power, resources, and economics. To understand this, let's step back. The Houthis, long engaged in a brutal war with Saudi Arabia, have now widened their reach to strike Israel. Why? Because the conflict in Gaza, the ongoing occupation of Palestine, and the global rivalries between the U.S., Iran, and Saudi Arabia have all turned Yemen into another battlefield in a much larger war. What we see in Eilat is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a system unraveling. And let's be clear, this war is not only fought with bombs and drones. It is fought through oil markets, global trade routes like the Red Sea, and international alliances. When a drone hits Eilat, Wall Street trembles, shipping companies recalculate routes, and investors wonder, is the Middle East sliding into a war that could choke the arteries of global capitalism? The mainstream media will tell you this is about terrorism or security threats. But let me remind you, Israel, backed by billions in U.S. military aid, represents the Western economic and military footprint in the Middle East. The Houthis, by striking Israel, are sending a signal, not just to Tel Aviv, but to Washington, Riyadh, and beyond, that no empire's outpost is safe when people feel crushed, silenced, and excluded from the wealth they help produce. This, my friends, is the economics of war. Ordinary people, Israelis in Eilat, Yemenis under Saudi airstrikes, Palestinians in Gaza, pay the price with their lives and futures. Meanwhile, the arms manufacturers, oil corporations, and financial speculators reap record profits. The tragedy is not only the bloodshed, but the fact that these wars are profitable and therefore endlessly reproduced. The recent strike on Israel's southern port city of Eilat by Yemen's Houthis represents far more than a single military event. It is a sign that the conflict in the Middle East is expanding beyond the borders we have grown used to watching. For years, much of the world has viewed the violence in the region through a narrow lens: Palestine versus Israel, or perhaps Lebanon's Hezbollah against Israel. But now, with the Houthis projecting force hundreds of miles away from Yemen into Israeli territory, we are entering a new phase, one where wars are no longer local but regional, and the risks multiply with each drone that takes flight. The first hook we must grab onto here is the sheer audacity of this move. A group long written off as confined to Yemen's mountains has just demonstrated it can hit Israel directly. That sends shivers through every government with interests in the region. Think about what this means strategically. Eilat is not just another city. It is Israel's southern gateway, a hub for trade routes connecting to the Red Sea, a strategic waterway through which vast amounts of global commerce flows. By striking there, the Houthis were not simply attacking an Israeli target. They were showing that they could disrupt the arteries of trade and remind the world that Yemen's war is tied to global economics as much as it is to local politics. It is a statement that Israel's conflicts cannot be contained within its borders, and that even distant players can insert themselves into the battlefield. This changes the calculus for military planners in Tel Aviv, Washington, Riyadh, and Tehran alike. Consider also the timing. The Gaza conflict continues to rage, drawing enormous global attention and fueling anger across the Arab and Muslim world. In that context, The Houthis action serves as a message of solidarity with Palestinians, a way of signaling that resistance against Israel is not limited to Gaza or Lebanon, but has taken root in Yemen as well. The hook here is clear. What was once seen as a two-front confrontation for Israel, Gaza in the south and Hezbollah in the north, now looks like a multi-front challenge stretching thousands of kilometers. This adds immense pressure on Israel's already overstretched defense system and forces its allies, especially the United States, to rethink their commitments and strategies. The expansion also reveals the nature of modern warfare in this region. It is not just about tanks, fighter jets, or boots on the ground. It is about inexpensive drones, asymmetric tactics, and the ability of relatively small groups to destabilize entire states. The Houthis, armed with modest resources compared to Israel, have nonetheless managed to shift the balance of fear. For ordinary Israelis in Eilat, the sound of air raid sirens and the injuries sustained in this attack drive home a message: their conflict is no longer local nor confined to their traditional enemies. It is spreading, unpredictable, and much harder to defend against. That fear is itself a form of power in today's geopolitics. What does this mean for the broader region? It means the Middle East is sliding toward interconnected wars where each conflict bleeds into another. Yemen's fight with Saudi Arabia now touches Israel. Israel's war in Gaza now reverberates in Yemen. Iran's shadow looms over all of it as it supports groups opposed to U.S. and Israeli influence. The more these lines blur, the more difficult it becomes to contain violence in neat boxes labeled local disputes. Instead, we are witnessing the emergence of a regional web of conflict where one spark ignites fires in multiple places. That is a profoundly destabilizing development, not just for the Middle East, but for the world economy dependent on its energy and shipping routes. If you step back, you see how this strike on Eilat forces us to confront a larger truth. War today is never confined. The Houthis are not simply saying, "We stand with Palestine." They are reminding global powers that instability in Yemen cannot be ignored because it can project outward and strike at the heart of Israel, even touching Western interests. The hook, therefore, is the realization that the geography of war has expanded, and with it, the risks of escalation grow exponentially. This is no longer just about Israel's security. It is about the future of a region where every new front multiplies the dangers for everyone involved. When the Houthis struck Israel's southern port of Eilat, the immediate headlines focused on the injured civilians and the military details of the attack. But behind the smoke and rubble lies a deeper, more dangerous story, one about economics and strategy on a global scale. A drone strike in Eilat is not just a local incident. It shakes confidence in vital trade arteries, rattles oil markets, and raises questions about the stability of one of the world's most sensitive geopolitical regions. The first hook we must seize here is the connection between a localized act of violence and its outsized impact on the entire world economy. Investors, shippers, and governments thousands of miles away suddenly find themselves calculating risks because of what happened in a corner of southern Israel. Eilat sits on the Red Sea, a narrow waterway that is more than a regional passage. It is a lifeline for global trade. Every year, millions of barrels of oil and billions of dollars worth of goods pass through this route. When drones fall from the sky in Eilat, insurance companies take note. Shipping firms reconsider routes. Oil traders see an opportunity to push prices upward, feeding fears of inflation in distant economies. The strike becomes more than an act of war. It becomes a disruption in the nervous system of capitalism. That is why the markets respond almost instantly to news like this. It is not because they care about the political details, but because they know instability in the Red Sea corridor means volatility for everyone. The strategic implications for Israel are equally profound. Eilat is not just a tourist city, it is Israel's southern window to the world, connecting its economy to Asia and Africa. A strike there is a reminder that Israel's economic lifelines are vulnerable in ways the Iron Dome or the most advanced fighter jets cannot fully protect. Modern warfare is cheap, asymmetric, and devastating for economic confidence. The Houthis use of drones highlights that you do not need a navy or an air force to threaten a nation's trade routes. You only need technology, determination, and timing. This hook pulls us into the uncomfortable reality that advanced military powers remain economically fragile when confronted with unconventional tactics. For the region at large, the economic ripples cannot be ignored. Oil markets, in particular, are acutely sensitive to Middle Eastern instability. Each strike, each escalation sends speculation soaring. Even the possibility of disruption is enough to add a premium to oil prices, enriching producers but burdening consumers around the globe. This is not an accident, it is the economics of conflict. Those who manufacture weapons, those who trade in oil, those who speculate in financial markets, these actors profit when instability spreads. Meanwhile, ordinary people in Israel, Yemen, Europe, or Asia pay more for energy, for goods, for daily life. The tragedy is that the profits of war are privatized while the costs are socialized. Strategically, the United States and its allies now face difficult choices. Protecting the Red Sea trade routes has long been a priority, but each new attack forces Washington to consider deeper military engagement, more warships, more surveillance, more military spending, all justified as necessary to keep global trade flowing. Yet each escalation also increases the risk of direct confrontation with Iran, the Houthis key backer. The hook here is that a strike in Eilat does not stay in Eilat. It drags powerful nations closer to decisions they cannot avoid and costs they cannot control. For Israel, the economic message is harsh. No matter how strong its military might, it cannot shield every trade route, every port, every hub of commerce. That vulnerability is a pressure point its adversaries will continue to exploit. And for the broader world, the recognition is equally stark. Stability in the Middle East is not a regional issue, but a global necessity. Each drone launched across the desert skies carries not only explosives, but also the potential to disrupt global supply chains, shift currency values, and alter the balance sheets of companies continents away. The Houthis understand this, and so do the investors who watch these events unfold. The world's financial system is tethered to the stability of regions like the Red Sea, and when that stability wavers, confidence crumbles. That is why what appears to be a single strike in a single city becomes a story of global consequence. The hook that draws us in is the realization that wars today are not fought only on battlefields. They are fought in oil prices, stock markets, and shipping routes. The drone strike on Eilat proves that modern conflict has no borders when it comes to economics, and that every explosion reverberates far beyond the city where it lands. The Houthi strike on Eilat does not exist in isolation. It is part of a much larger picture of proxy wars that stretch across the Middle East and tie together the ambitions of global powers. What makes this incident especially important is how clearly it highlights the struggle between alliances, the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia on one side, Iran and its regional partners on the other. The hook here is that the drone that struck Eilat carried with it not only explosives, but also a message. The conflicts of the Middle East are interconnected, and every attack is a reminder that this is not just about local grievances, but about the shifting balance of global power. Proxy wars are nothing new. But the Middle East has become the stage where they are most visible and most dangerous. The Houthis, though based in Yemen, are widely supported by Iran, which sees them as a way to push back against Saudi Arabia and, by extension, the United States. When the Houthis strike Israel, they are not simply responding to events in Gaza, they are advancing a larger strategy of stretching U.S. allies thin and proving that American-backed security guarantees are not as reliable as Washington claims. The hook that makes this development gripping is the way a relatively small group can leverage outside support to punch far above its weight, forcing nations with vastly larger resources to spend more, to worry more, and to reveal their vulnerabilities. For Israel, the expansion of threats to include Yemen means it is increasingly caught in a web of conflicts that were once seen as separate. It now faces the prospect of a multi-front war where Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen all connect through Iran's strategic vision. The idea that one nation can manage these fronts alone is fading fast. Instead, Israel becomes even more dependent on U.S. military and political backing, which itself drags Washington deeper into regional conflicts that it has long wished to scale back. The hook here is the way local actions in the Middle East keep pulling the world's superpower back into battles it cannot easily escape. From the U.S. perspective, this is a reminder of the fragility of its alliances. Washington has poured billions into arming Israel and Saudi Arabia, presenting them as strongholds against Iranian influence. But every successful Houthi strike shows that this strategy is deeply flawed. Iran does not need to confront the U.S. directly. It only needs to support groups like the Houthis, Hezbollah, and others to keep America's allies off balance. This asymmetry is powerful, and it forces Washington to choose between escalating militarily, risking another endless conflict, or watching its credibility as a global protector erode. The hook here is that great powers are being challenged not by rival armies, but by smaller forces playing a long game with outside backing. For Saudi Arabia, the attack underscores how little distance there is between its own struggles with the Houthis and Israel's new challenges. Riyadh has spent years locked in a brutal war in Yemen, only to find that the Houthis are more resilient than expected. Now, as the Houthis reach into Israel, Saudi leaders see a future where instability in Yemen can spill across borders more freely than ever. This complicates Saudi attempts to normalize relations with Israel, since doing so could deepen Iranian determination to strengthen its regional partners. The hook here is how quickly the Middle East's delicate diplomatic maneuvers can be derailed by the simple fact that proxy wars never stay neatly contained. Iran's role in this is impossible to overlook. By backing groups like the Houthis, Iran projects power far beyond its borders at a relatively low cost. It has built a network of partners that can strike at U.S. allies in ways that Tehran itself does not need to attempt directly. The drone over Eilat is a symbol of that network's reach and a warning that every escalation in Gaza or every move by Saudi Arabia could be met with blows from unexpected directions. What makes this gripping is the realization that Iran's proxy strategy has turned the region into a chessboard where every move forces opponents to play defense. The drone strike on Eilat, then, is not only about Yemen and Israel. It is about the future of how wars are fought and who pays the price. Proxy conflicts are cheaper, harder to predict, and more effective at bleeding rivals over time. The Houthis have now shown they can extend Iran's reach into Israel itself, complicating U.S. strategy and unsettling Saudi plans. Each of these layers makes the strike more than a local event. It is part of a broader contest that links villages in Yemen, streets in Gaza, markets in Tel Aviv, and offices in Washington. The hook that keeps us returning to this story is the recognition that every proxy strike is a warning shot in a war that is much larger than the battlefield where it happens, a war that defines the balance of power across the entire region. When we look at the Houthis' strike on Israel's Eilat, it is tempting to focus only on the images of destruction, the injured civilians, and the geopolitical headlines. Yet beneath all of that lies a deeper and more uncomfortable truth. While ordinary people across Israel, Gaza, and Yemen are paying the heaviest price, powerful industries are quietly profiting from the instability. This is the harsh paradox of modern war. Human beings bleed, economies strain, and communities collapse, while arms manufacturers, oil corporations, and financial speculators record profits that climb with every escalation. The hook here is that the very suffering we witness on television screens becomes the raw material for corporate gain, a system that rewards war instead of peace. Consider the weapons industry. Every drone strike, every missile launch, every counterattack requires replenishment. Israel receives billions in U.S. military aid, much of it funneled into contracts with American defense contractors. The Houthis, though operating on a smaller scale, rely on outside supplies and black market flows of weaponry that also fuel profits for shadowy networks. Each new front in the Middle East means more orders for arms, more testing grounds for new technologies, and more justification for governments to increase military budgets. For the arms industry, war is not a tragedy, it is a business model. The hook here is the recognition that the very companies designing and selling these weapons depend on instability to remain profitable, making peace a threat to their bottom line. The oil markets tell a similar story. The moment news of instability in the Red Sea reaches traders, speculation intensifies, prices tick upward, sometimes dramatically, based on the fear that supply routes may be disrupted. For consumers, that means higher costs at the pump, increased shipping fees, and inflationary pressures that ripple across economies far removed from the Middle East. For oil producers, however, it can mean windfall profits. Instability translates into scarcity premiums, and scarcity premiums translate into billions in additional revenue. The hook is that while families in Tel Aviv or Sana'a worry about survival, oil executives and traders in global financial centers see opportunity and profit from the very chaos others are desperate to escape. Financial speculators also join the game. Global markets thrive on volatility, and war is one of the most powerful engines of volatility there is. Each new strike pushes investors towards safe havens like gold or the US dollar, reshaping capital flows in ways that generate profits for those who know how to play the system. For hedge funds and traders, news of the Houthis striking Israel is not only a geopolitical headline, but a chance to make money on the swings of the market. Once again, instability creates winners and losers, and in almost every case, the losers are ordinary people paying more for food, energy, and basic security, while the winners are those who gamble on chaos. This imbalance is not accidental, it is structural. Wars persist in part because they are profitable. If the economic system punished war rather than rewarding it, incentives would shift. But as long as governments funnel public money into arms contracts, as long as oil prices spike with every drone launched, and as long as speculators treat conflict as opportunity, we will continue to see the repetition of violence. The hook here is the grim realization that behind every war headline lies a balance sheet. And on that balance sheet, the losses belong to ordinary people, while the gains flow upward to those least affected by the actual fighting. For the people living in these war zones, the experience could not be more different. In Eilat, civilians hear air raid sirens and run for cover. In Gaza, families live under bombardment and blockade. In Yemen, communities have been devastated by years of Saudi-led airstrikes and economic collapse. These are the people who suffer displacement, hunger, trauma, and death. They are the ones who cannot afford to flee, who lose children and livelihoods in the chaos of war. Their pain rarely translates into profits. It translates into silence, invisibility, and the slow erosion of hope. And yet the global system ensures that their suffering keeps the machinery of war and profit moving. The hook that should hold our attention here is this: the Houthi strike on Eilat is not just a military event or a political signal. It is part of a larger cycle where violence feeds markets, instability drives profits, and human suffering becomes an externality ignored by those who benefit. Until this cycle is broken, each new conflict will produce not only casualties, but dividends, and the incentives for peace will remain weaker than the incentives for war.